In her book, Slow Dancing with a Stranger, Lost and Found in the Age of Alzheimer's, she details her life as a caretaker and advocate, the struggle to get a diagnosis, the emotional and financial hardships, and the limitations of long-term facilities. It's a profoundly honest story of courage and hard work. So to enhance the public conversation, she's come to share her book with us today. And so thank you very much. I welcome Meryl Comer.
Thank you. And my thanks to you all coming out on this glorious day, this last day of summer. I'm really very touched. The issue is very important, I think, to all of us. I'd like to do a survey. I'm much more interested in the audience than I am in myself. So I want to ask you, how many have a family member or relative with this disease in the audience? How many have a friend or colleague whose loved one has been affected? A family member or friend in a caregiver role. Are you concerned about a loved one or yourself? Raise your hands. Are there any doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, or politicians in the audience? Oh, good. We have a good conversation going. This is a very special audience to me because you are engaged around the body politic in this town, and to the C-SPAN audience, this to me is one of the most important stops that I will ever make on a book tour. This morning I Googled to see how many books have been written on Alzheimer's. There are over 11,000 books, which prompted me to think, do we really need another book on Alzheimer's? And out of respect for this audience, I thought I better tell you what this book is and what it isn't, in case you haven't read it. First of all, I applaud the thousands of authors who have written books to loved ones, to honor their memory, to speak of spiritually how they've learned to live within the disease. If you recall, this disease has been around for a very long time, and many of the nonprofits that grew up in that space had to help people live in the moment. When there's a disease with no cure, you have to be able to live in that space with a loved one that stretches out over years. The span of a disease like Alzheimer's can last from 3 to 20 years. And I'm right on the tip of 20 years, told that my husband would not last long because he was an early onset victim. And we can get into that issue later. Most of the books that I have read can't keep up with the idiosyncratic twists and turns of how each of us dements. After all, let's be respectful of ourselves. It's our brain. And we are different personalities. So it is very hard to write the book that will tell you how to manage a loved one through this process. But I couldn't write a book that what I call accepts the status quo. I have great admiration for those who help others live in the space, but I'm out to change something because this is a disease that will ravage our generation as baby boomers and create an untenable burden on our children. And I really find that totally unacceptable. So I'll share with you some of the descriptions, and when you put yourself out there as an author, you really put yourself out there as an author. Raw, unvarnished, but I also believe, and the reason I was willing to write it, it's a shout out to all caregivers, because caregivers are the keeper of the secret. We know the details, but most people don't want our details. So we are very quiet. We believe that it's our responsibility to protect a loved one's dignity. And we do that very well. We do that by hiding loved ones away so you never see what the disease really looks like. It is very painful to see a smart individual reduced and totally dependent on you, or someone who can't remember who you are. I think that is one of the most traumatic things that happens. Because this is such an important audience, I thought I would like to share with you some of the latest statistics. I don't know if those of you in the New Republic this week, the Age of Alzheimer's, you and everyone you know will eventually be touched by this disease, but living with it doesn't need to be so cruel. This is a very cruel disease. 50% of people will develop some form of dementia by the time they are 85 years of age. And remember that 85 now is the fastest growing demographic in this country. And also, by the way, predominantly women. So this is a huge issue. So let's fast forward, and I will not go beyond 2030 because politicians can't get beyond the 1 year. We will have 76 million people suffering from this disease. Now, the impact is growing. 44 million victims worldwide, 10 million baby boomers, and $1 trillion in annual costs to care for loved ones with this disease. And this is what we view as the crisis of our generation and our children. Those are the numbers. We spend $215 billion annually on this disease. And if you look at the very bottom, that little red line, less than 1% on research. So let's do a comparative on the numbers. We spend about $9 billion on HIV/AIDS. I believe in that. Cancer, around $5 billion a year. And less than 1% when we have 76 million baby boomers turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 a day, 4 million a year for the next 20 years. The youngest baby boomer, by the way, turned 50. Anybody here 50? Younger than 50? Because I want to talk to your generation too. This just came out from a Merrill Lynch study done in conjunction with AgeWave. More people now cite Alzheimer's as the scariest health condition of later life than cancer, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, and arthritis combined. The most worrisome disease, so look at the age spread. If you're 55 or over, it is definitely Alzheimer's. 45 to 64, cancer. 18 to 44 is cancer as well. This is the most worrisome disease of later life, Alzheimer's disease, but what is most striking, it's not just the boomers who are worried, it's our children who are worried. Our children are watching us take care of our parents, looking at the wear and tear and what it's causing havoc to their dreams and dreams that might be put on hold and saying, is that our future? This is one of the first times that we are beginning to understand how infectious, and I say infectious, although this is not a disease that you catch that way, it is to the family and intergenerational. For those of us who have spent a lot of time in this town, if you go back 20 years, the big debate was Social Security. That was going to create the intergenerational rivalry. This time, it's going to be Alzheimer's. The bottom line is that what happens is that this is not a normal part of aging. It is a neurodegenerative disease that is always fatal. 20 years ago, when my husband got the disease, there were no disease-modifying drugs whatsoever, except 1 or 2 to deal with symptoms. Today, there are no disease-modifying drugs, except the 4 that were available at that time. When my mother became ill with the disease as well, it became quite obvious to me that this was static. What was going wrong? Why wouldn't people be responsive and understand and be offended by this disease? Well, what I realized is people never solve the disease because we hid our loved ones away. And I need to tell you that caregivers are the keepers of the secret. The only reason I wrote this book was to unlock a conversation that has been hidden away. All right, look at the top worries about Alzheimer's disease. For those of you who may not be able to see in the back, how many of you are worried about being a burden on your family? Losing dignity. That compares with the Merrill Lynch age wave study. Being more isolated from friends and family. How many does that disturb? Not being able to do the things I enjoy. Health care costs and related expenses. Being in pain or discomfort. Dying. Quite frankly, after spending 20 years, my husband as a physician and those here who define yourself by your intellect and who you are, this is not a disease that you want to live with or impose upon families. The idea that you can control what happens to you with this disease, forget it. My mother hid away prescription drugs. I detail that in the book. But this disease slips over you, as you saw that video done by David Shank, who is also the author of The Forgetting. But it slips over you in a way so you are in and out of reality. I am my husband's co-pilot, his guardian. My husband hasn't known who I am for the last 12 years, but he knows my touch. I have to be persuaded that he knows my touch because I lead the team and I do a 12-hour shift every day, not only for my husband, but for my mother as well. Somewhere deep, you have to believe that you can reach a loved one in this space. A Washington Post reporter said that I said I've lost my prime. Well, I said it just about that way. And he said there seemed to be a bitter overtone. You cannot take care of a loved one for 20 years and be bitter. It would eat you alive. You have to find a place where you can help a loved one in the space. Now, care research over these past years has gotten better, but it hasn't filtered down to all of us. Art therapy, music therapy, it's all wonderful, but it only works in a very small period of time, and then you have to let it go. If you fight this disease, you will be destroyed along with the victim. And what I mean by that, it's not unlike, we all do palliative care. We play to whatever strength they have, and when they can't do it anymore, you have to let it go. And I beg you to let it go. It will just be too frustrating on you. Now, if you weren't persuaded this is an important issue, you're at 50% greater risk for this disease. Whoops. Sorry. We're having some problems with the slide. If you're overweight, if you have a metabolic disorder, diabetes, depression, any type of addiction, you are 50% more likely to get this disease. Women, does sex matter? This is a challenge we ran globally. We asked that question. Remember cardiovascular disease? Everyone assumed it was a man's disease, and it turned out to be the biggest killer of women. We felt that it was important to ask that same question. Sex-based differences matter, and that's one of the reasons when we launched Women Against Alzheimer's, we asked that research question. And now that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Think of Ambien. Think of what they're learning about differences in how women respond to pharmacological substances versus men. We must tease these differences out. We have deliberately, when we've created Us Against Alzheimer's, we've created an entire network that respects other ethnicities. We have African Americans against Alzheimer's. We have Latinos against Alzheimer's. We have clergy. We have researchers. We need to come together as networks and raise our voices that this disease is really unacceptable for our future. The reason it is such a big women's issue, we outlive men statistically. We are more prone to get it, but the science doesn't know why. What they do know is that women progress into the disease faster than men, into full-blown Alzheimer's than men. If it's on your maternal side, you are at higher risk for getting the disease. And 2/3 of the caregivers in this country are women. It is unpaid care. 70% of families try to take care of loved ones at home. Typically, there is an episode that makes it impossible to keep a loved one at home. The caregiver gets sick. Young children are endangered by the behaviors, and that's what prompts institutionalization in this country. In our case, my husband was a physician, as Andy mentioned, chief of hematology. Well, physicians are the worst. Any physicians here? He was in denial all the way into the disease, which made it even more difficult. Now, my husband maintained his brain. He was a long-distance runner, very trim, 6'2.5", very disciplined, spoke 4 languages, 200 published papers. Guess what? It didn't matter. And I think that's the most important point. As a generation, we are really into the use it or lose it mentality. We are into 60's the new 40. I would really love that. I try that every day. But we are in serious denial. And I think that's what inhibits us from having the conversation we need in this country about this disease. This is the disease of our generation. We went to the moon. 76 million of us. We're what Ken Dykewald calls the pig in the python effect. 76 million of us. We are transformational when we want to do something. And why aren't we in arms about this disease that will destroy our families, our lives, and burden the next generation? In denial made my husband very difficult to take care of, and smart people hide out for a long time because social skills go last. I could bathe, shave, dress, and take my husband to a reception in Washington, and everybody's so involved in this town, nobody noticed. If you kept moving, nobody noticed. My antenna are up every time I go to a reception. The woman who goes to the buffet and doesn't know what to pick up. Or the husband who says to me, Meryl, would you mind going and checking on my wife? She's in the ladies' room. She's been away too long. Or spouses who fill in for each other in their conversations when they've just returned from a wonderful trip and one of them doesn't remember where they were. The creep of the disease is everywhere, everywhere, but we are buying into the denial. We do not want to see what we are about to live with, and we play into that denial. Now, let's go back 20 years. 20 years ago, the diagnostics were not as good as they are today. Today, you could take a test that would tell you whether or not you have a high risk for the disease. Now, how many of you would like to know? I need to know. I need to know because I've seen what the disease does to families. I need to know because it's always too soon before it's too late. That end-of-life conversation that's so hard around the kitchen table or dinner. Do you know whether you've put your life in order so that your family doesn't have to guess about your end-of-life wishes? I will tell you that Ellen Goodman, the columnist from Boston, has a group called the Conversation Project. I direct you there because you can actually download all the forms you will need to have that conversation. My husband left me with no roadmap, although I do know that my husband would not have considered this living by any stretch of my imagination. There's some people who are here who knew my husband professionally, and they're shaking their heads. This is a very cruel disease. The doctors didn't want to diagnose, so try getting a doctor to a doctor. Lots of luck. The doctors I'm a doctor's wife, so I type up my observations. I do respect their time. They disappear and come back, no gross abnormalities, and I am brushed aside. What I have learned, I detail the journey in slow dancing, is I was ignored, totally ignored. And once ignored, then I became his victim. I was denying my husband access to things he's wanted. Go try to take a Porsche away from a 56-year-old man. We all wait too long in trying to give a loved one their independence. And my rule of thumb is anticipate, anticipate. I went in one night and pulled the plug on his car. I don't understand foreign cars, but I pulled whatever was there, locked the garage door, and for 5 years my husband said, "Where's my car?" And I said, "Oh, you had to get one of those damn foreign cars, and it's in the shop." Every day he asked where his car. But my peace of mind was his independence ended when he might endanger another human being. I could not live with the idea that I had not been proactive, and I would encourage anyone with a loved one. We want to give them their last hurrah for as long as they can, but always remember the people around them and who they might endanger. When someone wanders away, and that happens because even dementing people are very wily in their space, my heart tells me the family waited too long, or they had lived into the denial. I went public 12 years in. I went public because I was really frustrated by the conversation that was going on. The little old lady who forgot her keys. I don't remember my daughter's wedding, when this was the cruelest of diseases and no one was telling it like it was. So as a reporter, I thought, well, I have to show people the physicality of the disease, what it asks of caregivers, because we do need to respect the people who do this care. PBS came in. I said to them, because you lose control of the narrative, and I said, respect my husband's dignity. No shots below the waist if I'm bathing him. And this is our story.